Well, I think that a lot of people, including Brian Greene, want to create some sort of new space race. But in fact, what Artemis is planet Earth taking the next logical step out into space. We've done low Earth orbit, we've done the International Space Station, we've conquered space around Earth with robotic spacecraft, and now it's time to move on. And so this time, it isn't the United States trying to gain dominance over, say, the Soviet Union, which of course doesn't exist anymore. But today, it is all of Earth going to the moon. That's the invitation from the United States. Some nations may choose not to join us, but so far, 67 nations have signed the Artemis Accords, all agreeing that this should be the next step and all agreeing on rules of behavior as we go. Oh, I think so. I think when you look at what it costs to send humans to the moon for just 3 days, to bring back, and this may sound pejorative, but to bring back rocks, that was enough. We went 6 times. Actually, we tried to go 7 times, but we went 6 times. And we learned as much as we could in terms of human activity in space beyond Earth. What happened next was a budget decision. The United States, stopped going to the moon so that we could afford to do other things, like build a space shuttle, a space truck. Why do we need a space truck, a space shuttle? Because the downstream goal was to build an international space station. And the only way we were going to do that is if we had some sort of transportation system that would take us into space and a lot of cargo. And now, the space shuttle program has ended, right? Why? Because the International Space Station is built and complete and has been operating now for 25 years. And so what we did was we turned over the transportation of cargo and human beings to companies like SpaceX and continue to contract with our partners in Russia for the Soyuz launches. So was a logical step to not return to the moon at that time. Now we know how to live and work in space, and now the next logical step that it's time that we move away from low Earth orbit, which is where the space station is, onto the moon. And I should say, what we leave behind is a legacy of low Earth orbit human operations, such that now there are commercial entities that are going to build their own private space stations in low Earth orbit. And that's going to open a whole new commercial angle to the space economy worldwide. Oh, you know, it's a different world now, isn't it? When I was 11 years old and we went to the moon on Apollo 11, there were 3 news channels in the United States. And everybody watched one of 3 news channels right after dinner every night. So everyone knew that Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and I forget the third guy's name, the guy that didn't get to go down to the surface, right? Everybody knew they were on their way. And everybody was holding their breath as they landed that lander so close to the crater, right? Today, with all of the live streaming that we have, with all the different cable channels, with all the different news outlets, accomplishments like Apollo 11 would get buried in the noise. And so it's incumbent upon people like me. I'm retired from NASA, but I still travel the world and tell people about space exploration because I want people to know and I want people to hear. much time have you got? So what we learned from Artemis 2, aside from the humorous part, which I don't know if you remember or not, but Christina Cook noted that she now holds the record for the longest distance relationship between her and her husband, right? But when we went to the far side of the moon with the human eye, we were able to see moonlight illuminating the Earth. So normally what we see when we look at the moon, we're looking at the sunshine reflecting off the moon and coming back to Earth. But this time, what the Artemis astronauts saw as they were at the far side, they looked past the moon, and there was the Earth, its dark side now, right? Because the sun is behind the Earth. There was the moonlight reflecting off of the moon and illuminating the Earth. And the things that you could see, the cities illuminated at night, the oceans and the clouds, told us a great deal about what Earth is like. But even more importantly than that, the sun was shining through the Earth's atmosphere, and we could detect evidence of human activity in the Earth's atmosphere from the moon. So why is that important? Because today our technology in terms of examining distant stars and looking for planets is getting better and better. And someday we're going to want to know if those planets have an atmosphere, and then we're going to want to know if those planets' atmospheres have evidence of life, because that stands to answer one of the big three questions of space science. Right. So whenever you talk to a space scientist, he's always, talking about his data or his analysis. And I worked with some scientists that were trying to calculate the mass of a raindrop, right? But the reality is that a space scientist is really trying to answer one of three questions. Three really big questions. Where did we come from? Where are we going? And are we alone? So when we go to Mars and we start looking around at this dry, dusty place and we wonder, where did all the water go? We begin to ask ourselves questions about where Earth might be going as well. When we go and we start looking at Venus and we see how hot it is and how you have to travel through clouds of hydrochloric acid just to get down to the surface. And when you land on the surface, the pressure is so great that whatever you put down is only going to last for a couple of hours. Right? You ask yourself, is this possibly a clue as to what's going on Earth? In fact, what some people don't know is that the scientists that originated with the global warming theory were actually studying Venus when they came up with the theory about Earth's global warming. So where are we going? Where did we come from? And are we alone? Three major questions. And as we move forward and outward, that question of, is there life beyond Earth? Are we alone? Is going to be ever more important to us. So Brian is taking the idea that we have water in permanently shadowed regions of the moon. And if I'm remembering correctly, what he's saying is that represents an energy that can get us onto Mars. Well, that's true. You go to a permanently shadowed region, there's lots of water, ice there, frozen water. And what is water? It's hydrogen and oxygen. If we can electrolyze, first off, melt part of it, and electrolyze that hydrogen and oxygen, we'll have the fuel that we need to go on to Mars. Why is that important? Well, that's important because we don't have to carry it out of Earth's gravity. We can take it onto Mars. However, there's still a lot to be done before we could go onto Mars. We could certainly send humans to Mars, maybe to orbit Mars, but we couldn't get them back. We can certainly send Mars to maybe land on Phobos or Deimos, which is one of the 2 moons of Mars, but we couldn't get them down to the surface safely. And so there are technologies, there's 6 big technologies that NASA needs to conquer before we can reliably say that we can, all right. There's 6 big technologies that NASA needs to conquer before we can credibly say that we can go to Mars and come back. So you ask a very interesting question about the impact of what we are being flooded with now. We are inundated with data. Our capability to retrieve data, far more data than we can process with our human minds and our laptops, is just mind-boggling. Not just Nancy Grace Roman telescope, but radio astronomy. If you know about the Square Kilometer Array, and even Mauritius has a radio telescope, they generate so much data that we need tools like AI to help us sort through that and to fuse the different data sets together to make benefit from all of the space data that we've got. A quick story is we sent, in 2006, we launched a probe to Pluto. It took it 9 years to get there. It spent 2 weeks flying by Pluto, but it took 2 years to radio all the data it collected back. And the scientists today, 10 years later, are still going through all that data. So we live in a data age, and we need data tools to be able to understand them and use that data to the best of our ability. And I see AI as being able to help us do that. What comes next? I don't know. What's the result of what AI will find in its analysis? Like, will it see the beginning of the universe before humanity does? I don't think so. I think AI is going to remain a tool, just like when we were growing up, the typewriter was a tool. Well, maybe not when you were growing up, but when I was growing up. So I think AI is a tool to be used well. And there are, if I could just put a plug in for Mauritius, there are great spots in the world that can be centers for data processing, utilizing AI and data collection and fusion. Mauritius is an ideal spot for that sort of thing. Absolutely. That's a great question. When I meet a Mauritian and we start to talk about space, they get just as inspired as anybody else in the world that I've had the privilege to talk to. And immediately, though, as Mauritians, they begin to turn towards home. What is it that is important to Mauritius, right? It's like controlling the EEZ, worrying about unlicensed fishing, right? There's climate change issues. There's agricultural problems. These are issues that affect every Mauritian nearly every day. And these are issues that space data can assist with. Space is not going to solve the problem, but it certainly is going to inform those people that are going to try and solve the problem. So I look forward to including Mauritius, maybe someday in the Artemis Accords, right? A seat at the table as we go on to the moon. Not so much because Mauritius wants to send somebody to the moon, but they want to be able to have access to all of the other 67 nations that are going to collaborate as humanity goes on to the moon. So it's interesting. I was thinking about this just the other day. What did we learn from the setting up of Africa's first lunar symposium? And it didn't go exactly as expected. And I think what we learned was that these sorts of things really need to be organically grown from within the community that it's going to serve. I wouldn't call the symposium a failure, but I would say that we learned lots of lessons. And so as I'm sitting here in Mauritius and I'm thinking about small island developing SIDS, what does it stand for?
Small Island Developing States.
Yeah, that's right. Small Island Developing States. I think about the fact that they must come together and decide what's important to them and then look to space for solutions or to other disciplines for solutions as well. By the way, I kind of don't like the name Small Island Developing States. If you look at the Mauritian EEZ, it's the entire area of the EEZ is 65% of the area of the United States. So it's enormous. It's an enormous area to try and manage with such a small population. So the Artemis Accords is a set of guidelines. It's a non-binding agreement that currently has been signed by 67 nations around the world that govern behavior as we move outward into space. And so just like there are rules of maritime navigation, right? A ship declares SOS, you're obligated to go and help. The same is true in space. And so what we're looking for is nations that want to collaborate in space in a way that moves our current society outward in a friendly way and not in a adversarial way. And so we agree in the Artemis Accords to have to come to each other's aid. We agree in the Artemis Accords to have compatible hardware and communications so that we can back each other up. We agree in the Artemis Accords about what to do about mining resources on the moon. So it's a rule, it's a list of, I think it's about 12 rules that every nation agrees to behave by and abide by. Of course, it's not binding, it's not a contract, it's not a treaty, but it is something that the 67 nations of the world have agreed that they will do. Some of these nations don't have space programs. Just like Mauritius is just getting their space program started, right? There's Mearsat-1 that was a major accomplishment for Mauritius. And now the Mauritian Research and Innovation Council is talking about creating a space segment of their council. You know, Mauritius could come and have a seat at the table with everybody else that's interested in discussing how do we go to the moon and what do we do there when we get there. Doesn't mean that Mauritius is immediately going to have an astronaut on its way to the moon. Doesn't mean that you'll be putting satellites into space if you don't want to. It means that you'll be part of the dialogue. And I think that's extremely important as humanity goes further out into space, not just one nation. That's a really good question. So I think the first human born in space. is the thing that's going to galvanize the world. And we'll begin to realize that we are a people of explorers, that exploration is in our veins, and that we will be moving forward and outward as we develop society.